Many believe that the legendary city of Atlantis vanished beneath the sea over 10,000 years ago. But how accurate is that assumption? Let's dive deeper into the historical and mythological accounts to uncover some clues that may help us establish a more precise date, or perhaps even shed light on who the Atlanteans really were. Atlantis has fascinated people for millennia, and much of what we know about it comes from the Greek philosopher Plato. He described the mythical city in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. In these works, Plato claims that the story of Atlantis was originally told by an Egyptian priest named Sontius of Sais, who shared the account with the renowned Athenian lawmaker Solon around 600 BCE. Solon then passed this story down to his relatives, including the grandfather of Critias, a historical figure. Eventually the tale made its way to Critias himself, who reportedly recounted it to his contemporaries. It's important to note, however, that no other records of Atlantis exist outside of Platonic writings. There's no surviving literature, no ancient inscriptions, and no corroborating sources. All we have are Plato's interpretations. Modern references to Atlantis, like those found in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth by Dr. Dorial or Billy Carson's Compendium of the Emerald Tablets, are purely works of fiction. Similarly, the ideas of sunken continents such as Mu or Lemuria also have no basis in ancient texts. They are imaginative stories that have been woven into modern pseudo-historical narratives. These modern interpretations often blur the lines between history and myth, creating a pseudo-historical narrative that captivates the imagination but lacks historical evidence. One of the most common claims surrounding Atlantis is that it sank over 10,000 years ago. This belief stems from the mention of specific time frames in Plato's texts. According to the story, Solon was told that the founding of Athens occurred 9,000 years before his time, which would place it around 9,600 BCE, and that the founding of Sais occurred 8,000 years prior, placing it around 8,600 BCE. These dates have led many to conclude that Atlantis must have existed sometime during this era, perhaps as early as the end of the last ice age. But there's a critical detail that often gets overlooked. Plato's text never explicitly states when Atlantis met its demise. The story only provides dates for the founding of Athens and Sais, not the fall of Atlantis. In fact, if we follow the logic of the narrative, the fall of Atlantis must have occurred after the founding of Sais, since the city of Sais survived the catastrophe that supposedly destroyed Atlantis. This simple observation undermines the popular notion that Atlantis disappeared during the Younger Dryas impact period, a time associated with massive flooding around 12,000 years ago. The timing simply doesn't add up, even if we interpret the dates as normal solar years. Another widespread misconception is that Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, but if we carefully examine the text, we find a different picture. Plato doesn't say that Atlantis sank beneath the waves, rather, he says that after a great disaster the island was surrounded by land, making it inaccessible by sea. This suggests that, contrary to popular belief, Atlantis became an inland territory. It was not a sunken civilization, but a place that could no longer be reached by water. Additionally, the idea that the Atlanteans were a technologically advanced civilization far ahead of their time is often exaggerated. Plato's descriptions of their technology are more grounded in Iron Age realities, mentioning warships, irrigation systems, and chariots, but nothing resembling the fantastical technologies often attributed to them in modern retellings. There's no mention of futuristic devices or mysterious powers beyond the technological capabilities of their time. In conclusion, many popular claims about Atlantis are based on misinterpretations or exaggerations of the original texts. By carefully examining the evidence, we can separate fact from fiction and gain a clearer understanding of this enduring legend. The two dates given in Plato's story, the founding of Athens 9,000 years prior and Sais 8,000 years prior, have puzzled scholars for centuries. According to modern archaeology, the city of Athens as we know it wasn't founded until much later. During the Chalcolithic and pre-dynastic periods, around 5,000 to 3,500 BCE, Athens and Sais were merely small settlements. They didn't emerge as fully established cities until centuries after those dates. Here's where it gets even more interesting. According to the ancient historian Eusebius, the Egyptians didn't count years in the same way we do. Instead of using solar years, they may have used lunar cycles, meaning that a year was really just a month. As Diodorus Siculus explained, some of them attempt to abate the incredibility of such a multitude of years. by asserting that in former times when the revolution of the sun was not accurately ascertained, the year consisted of one revolution of the moon. If we apply this method of time calculation, then the 9,000 years Plato mentions actually translate to 9,000 lunar months, or about 750 years. This brings the founding of Athens closer to 1350 BCE, a far more realistic date that coincides with Athens' rise as a major Mycenaean city. Intriguingly, in Greek mythology, the hero Perseus is credited as the founder of Mycenae, another major city of the era. And Perseus has a direct connection to Atlas, one of the key figures in the story of Atlantis. According to legend, Perseus had a confrontation with Atlas that resulted in Atlas being turned to stone, becoming the mountain range that now bears his name, the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. Could it be that these myths reflect real historical events, just as Plato's story of Atlantis might? The alignment of these dates and myths with historical events continues to intrigue scholars, suggesting that there may be more truth to these ancient stories than we realize. If we look beyond myth and fiction, we may find a real-world counterpart to the Atlanteans in the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a seafaring people from the Levant who dominated the Mediterranean during the Bronze and Iron Ages. Their expansion was unmatched, and they established colonies as far west as North Africa, Spain, and even beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. One of the most striking aspects of Plato's Atlantis is its description as a colossal naval power, a theme that has led some to draw parallels with the Phoenician civilization. In fact, both Atlantis and Phoenicia share eerily similar descriptions: largest naval superpower, controlled territories in Tyrrhenian Europe, North Africa, and regions of Asia Minor, dominated the Pillars of Hercules and lands beyond, repelled Egyptian expansion, and clashed with Greek interests. Just as Plato's Atlantis supposedly rivaled Egyptian and Greek influence in the Mediterranean, the historical Phoenicians exhibited similar feats. They controlled trade routes as far as Spain, and like the Atlanteans, resisted Egyptian expansion into their territories. Where Atlantis purportedly clashed with Athens around 9,000 years before Solon, Phoenicia's reach brought it into conflict with Mycenaean Greece approximately 9,000 months before Solon, suggesting that these ancient accounts may represent a shared Mediterranean memory, exaggerated and mythologized over time. The Phoenicians' rapid expansion and control of vast territories, their shared gods with the Greeks, and their unmatched naval power all bear striking similarities to Plato's description of Atlantis. The Phoenicians worshipped gods like Cronus, Athena, and Zeus under different names, just as the Atlanteans are said to have honored similar deities. Could it be that the story of Atlantis is a distant, garbled memory of the Phoenician Empire and its conflicts with the Mycenaeans? In many ways, the story of Atlantis reflects a blending of fact and fiction, a historical game of telephone that has been retold and reshaped over centuries. What began as an account of real events, passed from Egyptian priests to Greek lawmakers, was eventually distorted by misunderstandings and misinterpretations. By the time it reached Plato, the story was likely a mix of truth and legend. But even though Atlantis may not be a real lost continent beneath the sea, its story offers us a glimpse into the ancient world, where myths were used to explain real historical events, where cultures clashed and conquered, and where powerful civilizations rose and fell. As Eusebius, Thucydides, and Diodorus Siculus remind us, the ancients counted time differently, and their stories were often far more complex than we might realize. The tale of Atlantis, whether true or not, continues to captivate our imagination, reminding us of the mysteries of the past.